It began life, as probably everybody knows, as a very successful film and a screenplay written by Mark Norman and Tom Stoppard, Oscar-winning screenplay. And then Disney, which produced the film, which made the film, decided they wanted to turn it into a stage play. So this wonderful British playwright Lee Hall came on board and adapted it for the stage. It was done very successfully in the West End and is running right now at Stratford in Canada. And we, I think, are the first American production of this play. So it's my when it first came up, when Bill Rausch said it was a possibility. The film is so wonderful. The film is kind of perfection. It's just the right balance of everything, and it's so smart and funny and romantic and great performances that I kind of thought, well, why would you want to turn it into a play? It is what it is. And then I read the script, and Lee Hall has done some beautiful things in expanding the story, expanding some relationships, deepening some relationships that I think if they had had more time to do in the movie, they probably would have, but we get to do that on stage. The movie is very much a romance, first and foremost, that takes place in the incredible world of Shakespeare's London. But the play, I think, allows, in a way, for a little more breadth into that story. So the play is very, very much still a romance, and quite a funny one. But it's also becomes very much about the act of theater itself and the act of creation itself and what it means to be an artist. And I think in the play you can trace more clearly what Will Shakespeare's arc is and what his journey is to becoming a better artist, or to becoming a truer and deeper artist. At least that's what I hope we can explore with this production. In addition to it being, it still is like the movie, just smart, funny, very Tom Stoppard in its wit and in its in the play of the low and the high, and the intellectual and the body existing within one sentence. And I think it will be incredibly satisfying for an audience that is well schooled in Shakespeare to see this, because there's a lot of inside Shakespeare jokes. It's a very large cast by OSF standards. It's 20 actors, it's 3 musicians. There are, I think at last count, 60 costumes, 60 changes for people, because people play multiple characters. People also, as people remember from the movie, we see Shakespeare's company. Well, it was before it was his company, but we see a company of actors rehearsing a play. So then they play those roles later. So everybody has multiple looks in the play. So it's quite ambitious that way. There's also video, which we'll be using, I hope, in some clever ways, and not ways that take away from the story, but sort of enhance and open the story in a good way. It's an amazing design team. Rachel Hauk is on sets, who is an old friend that we haven't worked with each other in many years, but she's amazing. She's worked here many times. Sean Dewan is video and projections, who did Twelfth Night. Susan Sue also did Twelfth Night this past year, and she's doing costumes. A new lighting designer, Xavier Pierce, which I'm very excited to get to work with him. And then an old friend, David Reifel, who is the composer who did Twelfth Night, will also be composing. And then Amadon, who's part of the sound department here, is doing sound design. It's very musical. It's not a musical, but there are, I don't know how many songs written into the script, and they are lifted from all over the canon. So there are songs from Twelfth Night, there are songs from other plays. So there's Shakespeare's lyrics, but it's very musical. So the musicians will be quite a presence There's a countertenor as well. So it is definitely, it is very much set in Shakespeare's world and Shakespeare's time, and uh, we're not holding ourselves strictly to one particular year in the Elizabethan reign, because, of course, fashion and costume silhouettes change so dramatically over the course of that time. We're giving ourselves a little more leeway, as we are with musically as well. But it will. David is quite remarkable in his how much knowledge he carries in him, and how much I have learned just from him in our just the start of the collaboration about Elizabethan music and uh, what that looks like. And another member of the team is Jackie Miller, who is our choreographer, who also did Twelfth Night. There's a lot of dance in the show too. Everybody knows that when Shakespeare was writing his plays and they were being performed, women were not allowed to perform on the stage. It was against the law. So this is a play that is it sort of takes a what if scenario and spins it out. As somebody who just directed Twelfth Night, which is one of my two favorite plays that Shakespeare wrote, which is very much about gender identity and gender, I think, fluidity. And clearly Shakespeare knew he was writing for a company that was all men who were going to be performing this, and that adds a certain other level of interpretation or energy to things. And I think I always feel slightly guilty, because in my career as an actor, I've played Viola, and I've played Lady Macbeth. I've played some of the great, and Rosalind. I've played some of the great roles that are women's roles in directors who are interested in what that meant to have to go back to Shakespeare's time and what that meant to have a man play those roles. But I've always felt guilty that I took those roles away from women. So I've always been intrigued by and interested in, what are the many faceted mirrors that Shakespeare created for us that we're still exploring about gender and power in these plays. Because in Shakespeare in Love, the most powerful person in the play, the most powerful person in the world at that time, was a woman. And yet she was very much constrained by what the mores of that time were, and what she was able to do and not do because of her gender. And I think the writers, the playwrights, all three, the screenwriters and the playwright, have really created this wonderful, it's like almost like a nesting doll, where you keep pulling something else off and something else reveals itself. And with the character of Viola de Lesseps, here's a young woman who is, her life is dictated by men, by her father, by her husband-to-be. She has nothing where she gets to make a choice. No area. And so someone who's attracted to the theater and who's bitten by that bug, which happens all the time, she makes a really bold decision to disguise herself as a man so that she can be part of this world at great risk to herself. And in the process, I think, in our play, reveals something profound to the man who is the greatest writer that the English language has produced, at least in the fanciful world of our play, about the power and the voice of women in his plays. He's not the greatest for gender equity, right? There are many plays where there's 20 men and 2 women's roles, and that's a reflection of his times. But he also created in Twelfth Night, one of the most fascinating roles for a man or a woman to play in Viola, and just how he so beautifully and deftly plays with the notion of power of all sorts in that play. And I think this Shakespeare in Love gives us a fantastical version of, well, how did he get there? And I think in our version of the play, he got there because he met this remarkable young woman. So look, I'll say, when I went to see the movie, I had read about the movie, and I remember sitting in the theater and crossing my arms and feeling very much a theater snob. Like, this is not going to work. This is going to be terrible. And in general, movies about theater, they don't understand it. And it's just not, and like, God, Shakespeare, like, just, it sounds terrible, right? And I, within 5 minutes, was completely taken and swept along by it and loved it. So I think there's something about this play that captures in a way that many other popular works of art don't about how theater actually gets made. And they do it in an incredibly funny way with lots of inside jokes, but they really do capture something that is truer than any other thing I think I may have seen. It's in the film world about the what how what who theater what that tribe is. Um, and I think for this audience who knows the canon so well, there's so many lines that are just thrown away from Two Gents, Romeo and Juliet, King Lear. Just it goes on and on and on. So I think it will be delightful, and I think it's a beautiful, it's a love story, and I think in our world today, we need more love stories. And love stories that are about two people that seem very ill-suited to be together at the beginning of their meeting because he thinks she's a man and she's a noblewoman. But, they end up not together, which everybody knows from the movie, right? It's not a happy ending, but they have, in the best way that love can do, changed each other. They've changed each other for good. And in the fanciful world of our play, she has changed Will Shakespeare for good, which we all will get to benefit from, right? Because she's expanded his heart and his mind. And and not that she leaves bereft, she leaves changed too. But I just think, I don't know, I think a rollicking, funny, like full of adventure love story um, that has something deep and beautiful and pure at its heart is a story that it would be good for everybody to see.